Airlines horror. Pedestrian killed after aircraft strike sparks emergency evacuation at Denver Airport. A terrifying late-night incident unfolded at Frontier Airlines when a departing passenger flight struck and killed a pedestrian on the runway at Denver International Airport, forcing pilots to abort takeoff and triggering a dramatic emergency evacuation. Now let's explore this story in detail and uncover the facts on our AI podcast.
I want you to picture this. It is late at night. You're settled into your airplane seat. Your seatbelt is clicked tight across your lap.
If you've got your headphones resting around your neck.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And you are just ready to head to Los Angeles. So you're looking out the window, watching the runway lights blur past as the plane accelerates.
You feel that, that heavy, familiar push back into your seat.
Yeah, as the jet engines roar to life, and then suddenly everything changes. I mean, the engines absolutely scream in reverse.
Which is terrifying.
Completely. The brakes slam so hard, you're thrown violently forward into your harness, and before you even have a chance to process what is happening, the cabin around you starts filling with thick, acrid smoke.
It's a total nightmare scenario.
It is. You're on Frontier Flight 4345 at Denver International Airport, and the reason you are suddenly in a fight for your life, well, it isn't a mechanical failure.
Right. No bird strike, nothing like that.
No. It is because someone was going for a walk in the dark. Welcome to today's deep dive.
Glad to be here for this one.
Our mission today is to unpack a truly harrowing incident report concerning that flight. We want to map out the exact timeline of a terrifying collision on the runway and explore the massive, glaring security questions that this whole event leaves behind.
Because when we look at the anatomy of this incident, it goes far beyond a single aviation emergency.
Literally.
I mean, it exposes a structural vulnerability in a system that millions of travelers place their absolute trust in, like every single day.
Okay, let's unpack this setup. It's a Friday. It's late. Right around 11:30 p.m. local time at Denver International Airport.
Pitch black out there.
Exactly. We're looking at Frontier Flight 4345, which is an Airbus A321. There are 224 passengers on board and 7 crew members.
A fully loaded plane.
Yeah, and they're out on runway 17 right in the middle of their high-speed takeoff roll, heading for LAX.
To put you in the cockpit for a second, you really have to understand the math happening in those moments. Takeoffs are usually, the most strictly mathematical parts of a flight.
Right, everything is dialed into the computers.
Everything. The pilots are watching their airspeed climb, waiting to hit specific markers. Most importantly, a velocity known as V1.
Wait, V1, that's the point of no return, right?
Exactly. That is the critical speed beyond which the takeoffs can no longer be safely aborted. Once you hit V1, you are flying. Even if an engine explodes, you're taking that plane into the air.
Wow.
So in this high-speed roll, it's a closed equation. They are rocketing down the pavement, totally committed to the physics of getting a nearly 200,000-pound machine into the air.
Right.
That is, until the absolute unthinkable happens. A pedestrian is walking across the active runway.
Which, I mean, just sounds impossible when you say it out loud. During this high-speed takeoff roll, in the dark, the Airbus actually collides with a person.
It's horrific.
And the physical consequences of that impact are immediate and catastrophic. Instantly, an engine catches fire. Yeah. And almost simultaneously, smoke begins bleeding into the passenger cabin. Wait, before we get into how the crew handled that, I have to stop and push back on this initial premise.
Okay, go ahead.
Because when I think about a runway at one of America's busiest airports, I think of it like, I don't know, a sterile operating room.
Right. Highly controlled.
Yeah. It's an environment where every single variable, every piece of metal, every vehicle is supposed to be tightly monitored. I mean, we have to take off our shoes for the TSA.
We have to empty our water bottles.
Exactly. We go through millimeter wave full-body scanners just to buy a coffee at the gate, but someone can just walk onto an active runway in the middle of the night.
I know we like to think of it as a sterile operating room, but the reality is that a runway is a highly porous outdoor environment.
Porous.
Yeah, you're fighting weather, you're fighting wildlife, and you're fighting miles and miles of perimeter fencing. It's less like an operating room and more like a heavily guarded state border.
That makes sense, actually.
But what's fascinating here is how the pilots reacted to that sudden, impossible variable appearing in their landing lights. When you're deep into a takeoff roll, initiating what is called a rejected takeoff, or an RTO, is an inherently violent maneuver.
Because of the sheer momentum involved.
Precisely. Imagine taking a fully loaded freight train, accelerating it to highway speeds, and then trying to stop it on a dime using nothing but the friction of a few rubber tires on concrete.
That sounds insane.
It is. That's the amount of kinetic energy the aircraft's brakes are trying to absorb in seconds.
Yeah.
That energy doesn't just disappear. The laws of physics dictate it has to convert into heat.
Right.
The carbon brake assemblies on the landing gear will literally glow bright orange.
Wait, literally orange.
Bright orange. They get so hot that there are special fuse plugs in the tires designed to melt. They deflate the tires safely so they don't, explode like bombs.
Wow. And they had to execute this high-speed abort while simultaneously dealing with an active engine fire.
Which completely changes the calculus of the emergency. You have red-hot brakes that could ignite leaking hydraulic fluid, and you already have an engine engulfed in flames on the wing.
It's a ticking clock.
Exactly. Every second the aircraft spends decelerating is a second that fire has to grow.
You can actually hear that precise urgency in the communications. We have the exact air traffic control audio from those moments, and it is chilling in its professionalism.
Those pilots are trained for exactly this.
Yeah, the pilot radios in, and I'm reading this directly from the transcript. He says, "Tower, Frontier 4345, we're stopping on the runway. We just hit somebody. We have an engine fire."
Notice what isn't in that transmission.
Right, there's no yelling.
No panic, no shouting at all. It's just incredibly clear, direct communication under unimaginable stress.
Yeah.
The crew is instantly declaring the emergency, identifying the hazard, and informing the tower of their exact status so ground control can scramble the fire trucks.
And here's where it gets really interesting, at least from a human perspective. The air traffic controllers immediately ask the pilots for the number of people on board.
Right, standard procedure.
And the pilot responds, "We have 231 souls on board. There was an individual walking across the runway." That word, souls.
It stops you in your tracks, doesn't it?
It's such haunting terminology. I mean, we're talking about highly technical aviation procedures, millions of dollars of machinery, V-speeds, and kinetic energy.
Yeah.
And then they use this ancient maritime term, souls. It strips away all the technical jargon and suddenly makes the sheer human stakes of this metal tube incredibly real. You aren't just managing an aircraft anomaly. You are responsible for 231 souls.
It really has a deep historical resonance, but it also serves a very rigid functional purpose.
Oh, really?
Yeah. When a pilot says 231 souls, that specific number dictates the exact scale of the emergency response required from the airport's rescue teams.
Okay, that makes sense.
It tells the incident commander exactly how many ambulances to dispatch, how many stretchers to prepare, and how many lives they need to account for, triage, and protect. It instantly scales the mobilization on the ground.
And that mobilization is critical because the threat isn't just on the outside of the plane. That word, souls, it triggers an immediate chain reaction because the tower knows what an engine fire actually means for the people sitting inside.
Right, the smoke.
Exactly. The source reports explicitly note that smoke was continuing to enter the cabin. And I want to make sure we understand the mechanics of that. How does a fire on the outside of the plane instantly fill the inside with smoke?
That comes down to the aircraft's environmental control system. Specifically, something called bleed air.
Bleed air?
Yeah. Commercial jets fly at high altitudes where the air is too thin and cold to breathe. So, to pressurize the cabin and keep everyone comfortable, the plane literally bleeds compressed, hot air off the jet engines.
Wait, from the engines themselves?
From the engines. It takes that air, cools it down, and pumps it into the passenger cabin.
So the engines are acting like the lungs of the airplane?
Effectively, yes. So if one of those engines suffers a catastrophic impact, catches fire, and begins burning jet fuel and oil, the bleed air system can inadvertently act as a conduit. It begins pumping that highly toxic, thick black smoke directly into the fuselage. And smoke in a confined aircraft cabin is arguably just as dangerous as the fire itself.
Because you can't breathe.
You can't breathe, it causes panic, it obscures the emergency lights, and, just a few breaths of toxic aviation smoke can completely incapacitate a person.
Yeah, it's terrifying.
The crew doesn't have the luxury of waiting to see if the fire department can put the blaze out. The standard in aviation is that you must be able to evacuate an entire aircraft in 90 seconds or less.
So you really have to visualize this nighttime scene. It's pitch black outside, illuminated only by the runway lights and the terrifying orange glow of an engine fire.
And the inside is getting darker by the second.
Yeah, the cabin is filling with smoke. The crew makes the call to evacuate. The emergency doors are thrown open and the inflatable slides deploy out into the dark.
Complete chaos.
You have 224 panicked passengers who just moments ago were settling in for a comfortable flight to LAX, now rushing to the exits, jumping onto these steep inflatable slides, and scrambling out onto the cold tarmac.
Evacuations, especially at night, are incredibly perilous. People are disoriented, they're terrified, and they are jumping from a significant height down a steep fabric slide.
It's not a playground slide.
Not at all. It's very common in these scenarios for passengers to suffer broken ankles, concussions, or severe friction burns. Especially people ignore the rules and try to drag their carry-on luggage down the slide with them.
Which people always try to do. But this raises an important point about the effectiveness of the systems we have in place. Because despite all of that, despite a high-speed aborted takeoff, a violent collision, an active engine fire, toxic smoke pumping into the cabin, and a nighttime slide evacuation into the pitch black.
A worst-case scenario.
The incident report notes an absolutely incredible statistic. Out of those 224 passengers, there was only one minor passenger injury reported. Just one.
It's astonishing. When you look at the sheer physics and the potential for absolute disaster in that scenario, one minor injury is a masterclass in emergency management.
It really is.
It proves the immense tangible value of those strict airline evacuation protocols. The flight attendants, who were primarily on board for safety, not service, managed to control the chaos.
They saved lives.
They got the doors open, assessed the outside conditions to ensure they weren't deploying slides directly into a fire, and evacuated 231 souls in moments.
It's a huge triumph of crew training. But we have to juxtapose that survival with the very grim reality of what happened outside the aircraft.
Yeah, the pedestrian.
Because while the 231 souls on board survived, the source material confirms the tragic fate of the pedestrian. According to officials cited by ABC News, the pedestrian was killed in the collision and, horrifyingly, had been at least partially consumed by one of the aircraft's engines.
It's a devastating detail, and it underscores the sheer violence of interacting with a commercial jet engine operating a takeoff thrust.
It's not just a car hitting a person.
No, not at all. The suction created by those massive fan blades at the front of the engine is immense. There is a designated danger area around a running jet engine that ground crews are trained to avoid because it operates like a massive vacuum.
So they get pulled in.
Exactly. A pedestrian walking on the runway wouldn't just be hit by the plane, they would be subjected to those aerodynamic forces.
The Denver Fire Department had to rush in, secure that horrific scene, and extinguish the blazing engine. And as a result, runway 17L, one of the main arteries of this massive airport, is completely shut down.
Which is a huge deal for the network.
Right. It becomes a crime scene, a recovery site, and a major investigation zone all at once.
Which represents a massive disruption. When a runway closes at a primary hub like Denver, the ripple effects are felt from coast to coast in delayed and canceled flights.
Oh, I'm sure.
But more importantly, it marks the transition of this event from a localized emergency response to a systemic federal investigation.
So what does this all mean? How can a major piece of national infrastructure, a place we pour billions of dollars into securing, have such a fatal blind spot?
That's the real question.
We've looked at the visceral moment-to-moment details of the accident. We see the success of the evacuation, which was a triumph of procedure. But that success stands in stark, glaring contrast to the massive failure that preceded it.
The perimeter security.
The failure of airport perimeter security.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we realize this is no longer just an aviation accident. It is a severe national security breach.
Right.
You have multiple federal agencies, including the Federal Aviation Administration and the National Transportation Safety Board, descending on Denver.
The NTSB and FAA don't mess around.
No, they don't. And their mandate is much broader than just looking at the burned engine or the deployed slides. They are investigating how a catastrophic breach of this magnitude could occur. And to understand how this happens, you really have to understand the physical scale of Denver International Airport.
It's massive, right?
Massive is almost an understatement. Denver International covers over 53 square miles of land.
53 square miles.
Yes. To put that into perspective, it is more than twice the size of the entire island of Manhattan.
That is absurd.
And it's situated out on the Colorado Plains. Securing that perimeter means maintaining miles and miles of fencing against severe weather, wind, and the sheer vastness of the geography.
I want you, listening to this, to think about your own experiences flying. Think about the last time you went to an airport. The stress of the security line, pulling out your laptop, making sure your liquids are in the right size bag,
Taking off your shoes.
scanning your ID. We all participate in this implicit social contract. We agree to be searched, x-rayed, questioned, and monitored, and in exchange, we trust that the airport is a secure fortress.
We assume we're safe.
We believe that once we are past that checkpoint, we're in a protected bubble. But this incident completely shatters that illusion. It proves that the most advanced aviation technology in the world, flown by highly trained professionals, can be completely derailed by a single person walking where they shouldn't be.
It really highlights the vast difference between internal security and perimeter security.
Right.
Terminals are bottlenecks.
Right? Everyone goes through the same door.
Exactly. You force everyone through a narrow corridor, the TSA checkpoint, which is easy to monitor with cameras and agents. But an airport perimeter of 53 square miles often borders public roads, open fields, and remote service areas.
It's just a fence in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah. Securing that much physical space, especially in the dark, against a determined or confused individual is an entirely different logistical challenge. It requires a network of infrared cameras, motion sensors, continuous patrol routes, and rapid response times.
But it's a challenge they have to solve because the stakes are literally life and death. If the plane had hit the pedestrian just a few seconds later, after hitting V1 speed, they would have had to take off with a damaged, burning engine.
And try to land it again.
Yeah. They'd have to attempt an emergency landing, which introduces a whole new set of catastrophic risks.
Precisely. And that is why the NTSB and FAA investigations are so critical. Because a breach like this doesn't just threaten one flight, it threatens the fundamental premise of secure air travel.
Right.
They aren't just asking what broke on the plane. They are asking, where is the gap in the fence? Why didn't the perimeter alarms trigger? Where were the blind spots in the camera coverage?
Because if a random pedestrian can access an active runway, it forces you to ask, well, what else could someone with malicious intent access?
Absolutely.
And that really brings us to the core dichotomy of this entire event. On one hand, you have this shining example of the system working perfectly when it comes to the crew.
They did everything right.
They did. You have a triumph of pilot skill, identifying a sudden, impossible threat, and executing a highly dangerous, high-speed abort. You have a mechanical system that absorbed millions of foot-pounds of energy to stop the aircraft.
The Greeks did their job.
And you have crew training that safely evacuated 231 souls in the dead of night while smoke filled the cabin with only a single minor injury.
It is a textbook example of emergency management once the crisis began. The failure wasn't in the response, the failure was in the environment.
Because on the other hand, you have it juxtaposed against this tragic, baffling security failure that cost a pedestrian their life. A failure that allowed the crisis to happen in the first place. The aircraft was safe, the crew was prepared, but the environment they were operating in was compromised from the outside.
It is a stark reminder that safety is a chain, and a chain is only as strong as its weakest link.
Yeah.
You can have the most advanced aircraft and the best trained pilots in the world, but if a single link in the perimeter security fails, the entire system is put in jeopardy.
It is a lot to process. But as we wrap up today's deep dive, I want to leave you with a lingering question to mull over the next time you're standing in an airport terminal. We willingly accept the heavy friction of massive security checkpoints inside the terminal.
The scanners, the lines.
Right? We take off our shoes, we empty our bags, we submit to full-body scans, all to keep us safe from threats on the inside. But if someone from the outside can simply wander into the path of a departing jet in the dead of night, shattering that sterile operating room, what other massive invisible vulnerabilities exist in the everyday systems we blindly trust with our lives?
Okay, one question for you. What were the terrifying final moments inside the Airbus A321 as smoke filled the cabin and passengers were forced to escape through emergency slides after the deadly runway collision? Don't forget to comment it. Thanks.